The early days, oh, a better nation, fair and free, Scotland.
Hello, this is Scottish Independence Podcast, episode number 166. It's good to be back, and it's going to be an episode with a few bits and bobs and a recording of an important interview about the importance of winning over some more pensioners than we did last time. Before that, however, it's important to note that Archie McPherson has some strangely incongruous views. Here he is, first of all, in a video for the now highly discredited Scotland in Union group.
In September 2014, I voted for Scotland to remain in the United Kingdom at a time when the Nationalists were proclaiming this to be a once-in-a-generation decision. Well, my views haven't changed since then. Despite the complexities of Brexit, it would be disastrous for us to separate from our biggest trading partner and leave family and friends who live south of the border to become foreigners.
Okay, I don't agree with it, but that's one of Archie's views. Let's hear another of Archie's views. Strangely, and at the risk of going a bit Star Wars all of a sudden, you can kind of feel the conflict in Archie here.
And yes, as for London, of course, 77, that's the most vivid memory of all, because the BBC had asked me to go down in the Wembley special. You know, the Wembley special left about 10 o'clock at night, and
I must have given you danger money for that.
Well, exactly, because essentially it could cope with maybe about 500, and in fact about 5,000 on the train. It was like a longitudinal black hole of Calcutta. It was just unbelievable. Well, to be fair to the much maligned Scottish support, nobody was drunk on that train all the way from Glasgow Central to Motherwell. And thereafter, of course, things got pretty merry. And we arrived there, etc. And then the game itself. And that was sitting on the platform watching the Scottish supporters indulging in horticultural exercise on the Wembley pitch and in the Wembley crossbar. Beside and Pat, you'll know this only too well, working in the south a lot, beside indignant BBC radio people, television people who were looking down on us as if the savages had come. Well, there was an element in it where you could interpret it that way. And somebody said to me, how did you feel? I said, I wish I had been on top of the crossbar myself that day. You know, it was just one of these things where you don't need to apologise to these rather snotty figures around you.
Archie, there's still good within you. Let go of your hate and come back to the right side of the force. Now, joking aside, courtesy of Independence Live, here's some very interesting views from Pensioners for Independence about what went wrong last time and what we have to do right this time.
I'm Siobhan. I am freelance writer, do some writing for Common Space, and this is Peter Swain.
Hello.
To introduce Peter is founding member of Pensioners for Yes. We're going to have a discussion about strategy, why pensioners, what we've known the last time, and how we could take that forward. So, Peter.
Well, I'm a founder member of the relaunched Pensioners for Independence because there was a group called Pensioners for Independence prior to the 2014 referendum. And last autumn, I was quite concerned that it appeared to have completely disappeared from the radar. And this worried me because pensioners in 2014 were a large group of people who we failed miserably, really, to persuade in sufficient numbers to support the case for independence.
Peter, can I ask why you think that was? Why did we fail?
I think they were bombarded day in, day out by negative information from most of the media, and we were unsuccessful in countering that. It may be a little bit easier for us now that we've got things like Independence Live and things like the National, which supports us, but we failed quite badly, really, to convince a lot of these people of the case. And a little anecdote that I'm fond of telling is during the 2014 referendum, we had Yes Dunbar had a pop-up shop in the High Street in Dunbar, And one afternoon, an older lady came in, worried sick about what would happen to her pension when we became independent. And we talked to her for a while, and then someone took her outside and pointed out to her a copy that had been posted in the window of the shop of that letter from the Department for Work and Pensions, no less, only a few months old, saying that no matter what happens in the referendum, your pension is perfectly safe. And this lady stood there, carefully read through this letter from beginning to end, and then she still walked off worried sick about her pension. And this is what we were up against, really. All this campaigning by most of the media, and we seemed not to have sufficient opportunities to try to counter it. And because of this, people were worried sick, not just about pensions, but about all kinds of other things. And we didn't seem to have the means of countering some of this negative information and persuading people of the case for independence as we see it. And so, sorry, just to finish what I had in mind to say, because of this, I was worried that because perhaps you could argue that we lost the referendum last time because we didn't get sufficient support from retired people, I felt no one else appeared at the time, around the turn of the year, to be doing anything about trying to resurrect pensioners for independence. And so, glutton for punishment that I am, I thought, well, if no one else is doing it, I'd better do it. And I wrote a letter to the editors of about 100 newspapers all over Scotland, saying that there was an attempt to try to relaunch Pensioners for Independence, and inviting people to contact a dedicated email address that I'd set up for this. And within a couple of weeks, more than 20 people had replied, and because a large proportion of those people who responded early were in the greater Edinburgh postal area, we decided to try initially to set up an Edinburgh and Lothians group of Pensioners for Independence. And we're hoping to set up other groups as time goes on, with quite a few contacts now, for example, in Glasgow, and with quite a few over in the west of Scotland. So we're hoping to be able to set up other groups as time goes on. Sorry, I interrupted you.
No, I was just actually what I was wondering is what you think the issues are for pensioners in this forthcoming referendum. What do you think that will be the concerns and the worries and the hopes that pensioners might have in this next referendum?
I think a lot of pensioners are still worried by all this negative propaganda there's been from unionist press and so on, because they believe that if we become independent, an independent Scottish government will not be able to afford to keep paying their pensions. And I've just recently produced a flyer that my wife and I have already started distributing around where we live, and we want to distribute it more widely, pointing out the fact that recently Philip Hammond has said that it's extremely unlikely, in his view, that the Westminster government will be able to keep the triple lock on pensions after about 2020. And my flyer is contrasting this with the fact that the Nicola Sturgeon and the SNP have said that in an independent Scotland they would maintain the triple lock indefinitely.
Could you specify what is meant by the triple lock?
Of course. Well, if I can remember, it's a commitment that increases in pensions each year will be the highest, I think, isn't it, of inflation, the retail price index, or 2.5%. I think I think I'm right in saying it's the highest of those three. And the commitment is that pensions will be increased each year by the highest of those three. And Philip Hammond is now saying, no way we'll be able to afford that. And Nicola Sturgeon and the SNP government are saying, in an independent Scotland, we will be able to afford it, and we will insist on keeping that. And that my flyer says, what better reason do you need if you're a pensioner in Scotland to vote for independence?
And has there been, have you put out white papers and other things on exactly how Scotland, the Scottish government in independence would take over? Would they be taking over it? Because of course many of the pensioners work for the UK government or this or that. And I mean, would it be a transfer of responsibility to pay, or what academic work has been done on that?
I'm not aware that an enormous amount of academic work has been done. Pensioners for Independence hasn't done any serious work on this yet because we're a very new organisation. We only started really effectively in January this year, so we're still beginning to find our feet. But Ian,
because part of the thing that I'd like to be able to do is to bring together people to do this type of research and to answer a lot of these questions in a much more substantive way than maybe I remember I talked to my uncle who's a pensioner, and he was very much, well, I might for independence, but how much is going to cost me to because I had a much more you'll have your autonomy, all that, but he's obviously he's very concerned about his money, and he looked at it from a strictly legal and he seemed like I imagine he voted no, but I imagine he's someone that could be convinced if the economic case was clearly laid out.
People like that who are a bit borderline and just need that little bit more information to tip them over the edge. But I've been in touch not so long ago with Ian Blackford MP, who was the party's spokesperson on pensions matters, and Ian has said that he and his team are working at the moment on some new ideas about pensions, and he's promised that when these ideas are worked out, they'll let us know about them, so that we are hoping to be able to use those ideas in our campaigning. But I think it's all a little bit uncertain at the moment because we haven't got detailed ideas fully worked out. But that's obviously a priority.
And I think that's the kind of groundwork that needs to be done, at the beginning of the campaign. Well, I mean, I think the campaign has begun, but I mean, and I'd be very interested in getting your, making contact and getting your email and trying to, build that kind of that net research base that was so lacking last time.
I think you were asking me what I thought affected the result, and I think you've just put your finger on it, really. There was a lack of research and a lack of detailed information that we could provide to pensioners to try to convince them. And it's extremely difficult to convince people because for years and years they've been bombarded with all this negative stuff from the unionist press. So it's a real challenge for us, but it's a challenge we've got to step up.
No, exactly.
There's a point that my brother made a few weeks ago when we were having a discussion about pensions and stuff, and the point that he was making was basically that when you're dependent on the state for all your income, then it's a really, really scary thing to actually put your faith in another state.
That's right.
And to provide that income for you. A lot of people have income from other means and other ways, etc. But in terms of a pension makes you absolutely reliant on a state. So transferring that trust over to another state is really difficult. And I think that kind of ticks some of the points that you guys are making, is because if pensioners don't have a security, if they think that it's going to be in any way under risk, then of course they're not going to take that leap because it's everything that they've got. So it goes back to the research process. Like the SNP and the Scottish Government, they have to be absolutely clear and absolutely detailed as to how pensioners will be protected in an independent
This is
Scotland.
very important. And of course people say, well, people worry about whether Scotland could afford to do these things. And one thing people say is, how would you cope now that the oil price has collapsed and so on? And a point that I want to make to people frustrating that I'm making in another flyer that I've produced recently. What's the biggest single financial benefit from oil at the moment? It's all the taxes that the big oil companies
that goes to the treasury right now.
Oil companies pay on their profits. Right. Where does that money go? Straight to the Westminster Treasury without even touching the sides. And if we were independent, all right, that income is not as great as it was a few years ago, but
it's still huge.
But it's still a lot of money
for 5 million people, as opposed to 65 million people throughout the. It's massive.
It's massive. Instead of disappearing into the black hole that's the the London Treasury.
But
so
I think Andrew
immediately we'd be better off in that way.
Andrew Wilson, though, the economic advisor, had announced just last week, I think, I'm sure he said that basically oil would not be taken into the overall accounts for an independent Scotland, that it would be seen definitely much as an extra, and it would be put in for voluntary projects, etc., etc. So in terms of building a Scottish economy, I think it was